Great day and welcome to Logic Lives. Today we're going to talk about how you could potentially save yourself a lot of money in the next couple of months by considering refinancing, getting another car loan, doing a balance transfer to save yourself some long-term funds on the interest that you're currently paying. So one of the things that has occurred in the last couple of years is a sharp rise in interest rates, and it affects everything from your mortgage, auto loan, credit card payments, anything that you are paying interest on, debt is impacted. And if you've recently bought a home in the last couple of years or accumulated any debt in the last couple of years, you're probably impacted by higher interest rates. The reason that the interest rates have gone up is because there's a concerted effort to try to stop people from spending money because that stifles inflation. So if people feel the pain or just can't get qualified to get a new loan, then they're not going to be able to make that next purchase. So interest rates have been really high the last couple of years, and now they're starting to come down. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's causing it to come down and how you potentially benefit here in the next couple of months. So a lot of people don't understand that interest rates are tied to a treasury yield or a bond, and it's called the 10-year treasury yield. And more specifically, it's used as a benchmark for many interest rates, including those for mortgages. As the yield of a 10-year treasury changes, so does mortgage rates. When the yield increases, lenders raise mortgage rates to remain competitive. And when the yield decreases, mortgage rates often follow suit. This is because the mortgages and 10-year treasury bonds are long-term interest instruments, and mortgages have relatively stable risk. However, to compensate investors for the higher risk of mortgages, mortgages fixed mortgage rates have historically been 1 to 2% point higher than the treasury yield. For example, on August 5th, 2024, the treasury yield was 3.78 and the 30-year mortgage rate was 6.47. However, since the early 2022, the gap between the two has widened to nearly 3 percentage points, making mortgages more expensive. So, in essence, when you think about the 10-year mortgage rate, it's basically the amount of interest that the bank has to pay the government in order to borrow money so that way they can lend it to you. And if they're borrowing money at 3%, they want to make their cut. So they usually put a 2%. And you see last couple of years, it's been almost a 3% spread from what they're currently borrowing at and then what they actually loan you the money at. So how this impacts you is if we take a look at treasury yields in the last year, you'll see that around October 19, 2023 was the high, and it cost 5% for a bank to borrow money from the government. And based off of that, remember that 2-3% spread, interest rates were probably closer to 7.5, 7.25% because the bank is borrowing it at 5 and lending it to you with about a 2.5 to 3% kicker on that so they can get their money back. But if you look what has occurred since 2023 October, you'll see it's steadily declined, went up, declined, and currently, if you look at the rate, it is at 3.869, so 3.89. So if you think about going back from 5% to 3.9, that's almost 1.1% difference in terms of what the bank is borrowing at, and that's going to decrease mortgage rates. And now you're seeing mortgage rates decrease and roughly around 7.5% from that 7.5% or 7.25, roughly the same difference between that 10-year treasury yield. So back a year ago or even 2 years ago, you probably had a 7.5 interest rate. That's if you have great credit. And if you had so-so credit, it's probably 8%. It would be a really good time to refinance so that way you can save yourself some money off of your interest. You may want to consider whether you want to do it now or wait a little bit because if you look at the expected rate cuts to that borrowing rate set by the Fed. If you go by a poll of 101 economists to see whether they felt that there was going to be a interest rate cut and then what severity of that cut is going to occur this year, the U.S. Central Bank will cut federal funds rate by 25 basis points in September, November, and December, taking the range to 4.5 to 4.75% by the end of 2024, according to 54% of those folks that were polled. So there's a high likelihood that you're going to see rates go even further down, because if it's true and that federal interest gets cut by 0.75%, then you'll see that 10-year Treasury yield will also go down. May not go down exactly the same amount, but you're going to see it, instead of being 3.8, it might go down to 3.5. And so the good news is, going forward, you're going to see interest rates start to decline a bit on that 10-year Treasury yield. So this is not financial advice. I'm just giving you perspective and an opinion. My opinion would be that you should really think about looking at the 10-year interest rate very closely in the next couple of months and seeing when it might hit that bottom after some of these cuts, and think about doing a refinance at that point, because you may have the opportunity to go from a 7.5% down to a 6%. And if you think about that, that's saving 1.5%. And as we talked about on previous videos, I will show you what that 1.5 can do on the average mortgage. And not only that, but if you take some of that funds that you're saving, some of the funds that you're saving, and you actually invest, what it could do in the next 30 years for you. We'll try out the calculator. I'm going to say that the average medium home is 400,000 currently, maybe a slightly higher. But let's say you put 20% down payment. I'm going to roughly go with 300,000. So if you're saving 1.5% on $300,000 a year, that is $4,500. And I'm going to do basic math and say, if you divide that by 12, you're roughly going to save close to $400 a month on interest that is going to take away from your payment. So your payment will be $400 less a month, just based off of that 1.5% difference. And if you take that $400 a month and you enter it into the calculator, I'll put an initial investment of 400, because day one you're going to save that 400, and each month you put that 400 back into a portfolio or an investment vehicle, typically the stock market. And most people have about 25 years on their mortgage, I would say. Remember, the stock market makes about 10% a year since its inception. So we'll put the interest rate that will be earned on this is going to be 10%. There will be no variance difference. If you want to put a variance difference, you can. This is just basically going to show you the difference between if you put 2% variance, 12%, or an 8% yield on your funds that you're contributing. And of course, it's annually. We'll do that, and then we'll calculate to see how much money you could potentially save by doing it from 7.5% to 6%. And so you'll be amazed that in 25 years, that $400 that you're able to save from your mortgage payment and putting it into a stock investment and investing in just the broad index, will make you close to $500,000. And you only really contributed $120,000 in 25 years. All the other growth is based on compound interest, and that 10% grows every year on the 10% that you earned the previous year. So long story short, take a moment and consider reaching out to your lender, whether it be a mortgage rate, a loan, credit cards. So they're all tied and relatively interact the same with the 10-year treasury yield. So reach out, and once you see in the next couple of months the 10-year yield has stabilized in terms of where you can see it day after day, consider doing a refinance, because if you can even get half a percentage point difference on your mortgage rate, auto loan, credit cards, it's going to save you a ton in the long run. So hopefully you learned a little something. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe.